Next up is our next talk by Dan Vávra, the most legendary. He was a member of the demo group Bronco. There was Bronx in the 90s, and then he moved on to gaming, and he is the creator of famous Mafia game, and right now they have the 10th, on IMDb I found it, it's 10th best game of 2018, Kingdom Come Deliverance. Hi Dan, how are you?
Hi, nice, fine, thank you.
Who invited you here, Stan? Was it him in person?
Stan, I think.
And why did you come? Was it because of like the 90s, do you remember Demobit? Did you go to Demobit before?
I was here in 2000, last time, and this year everyone I know went, including a couple of guys from our office, so I went as well.
Okay, nice. So right now you're working for the Warhorse Studios, and so you moved from demos to gaming. Was it a pleasure to finally start making money off your hobby?
Warhorse Studios is actually working for me, but yeah, it's nice. Yeah, we made some money, so it's good.
So what was the point? Like, let's do games. Like, what was the point? Like, okay, let's use what we learned in demos and let's try to make a game.
Actually, that's what my talk is going to be about. So it's a hour-long answer, so I would keep it for that.
Okay, and right now you're working still probably on Kingdom Come. What are you working on? Do we have any updates, any packs or something coming in?
We have lots of patching to do still, but we released a couple of DLCs. We are releasing 2 more. We just released a documentary that you could saw this morning. We are going to be releasing another documentary very soon about fencing. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff we are doing right now.
Somewhere I read you started developing the game in 2011, so it's 7 years. Is that true?
Yes, it's basically for me it's even longer because we were preparing it for 2 years before that, so 10 years almost.
And how can you do? I cannot imagine you start working in 2011 and the technologies, everything goes really fast. So you have to keep up with that and still like keep the idea and like maybe remake the stuff you made a couple of years ago again for the new technologies. Is it something like that?
Right now I am doing the same thing as well. So I took an Excel sheet. I looked at the prices of components of different parts of consoles, especially 15 years back. So I was like, okay, so when Xbox was released, you can buy like 8 gigs of memory for $100. So in 2 years, when the new one is released, they will spend another $100. What can I buy for $100? That's basically, I'm estimating the hardware. But, well, now we have the advantage that they tell us upfront sometimes, so we know more. But basically, that was like it was like this. It was some predictions based on previous experience.
Really nice. Okay, what are you going to talk about tonight?
As I said about how I started, what not only me, what influenced not only me but most people here, about the evolution that we went through and. Some connections between game development and Demoscene as well.
I'm really looking forward to that. Ladies and gentlemen, Dan Vávra.
So, hello. I was asked to speak about from Demoscene to game development, but it's kind of hard to speak about this, so I decided that I will do kind of like my little autobiography, which sounds a little bit selfish, but on this I plan to illustrate how we started, many people here I guess. Kind of summarize what influenced us most, what has the biggest influence on what we do today, how it worked, maybe what we can do today, what can we learn from that. I gave it the name Nothing is Impossible because basically that's all that we are doing. Most of the stuff that I did in the past was considered to be impossible to do, and most of the stuff that influenced me were things that were almost impossible to do, and it was super surprising that someone did them, and it inspired me to do the other very hard to do things. So I was looking at some old demos, and this is end of the Desert Dream demo by Kefrens, and I would say that if you forget number 42, this is the second best meaning of life you can get. So let's try to achieve this goal. This is my hometown. I will start with this because I have a kids right now, and I'm thinking about what starting position I should give them to have good life and to achieve something. And many people think that when you are not born to rich family or to good environment or with a lot of money or something, that your chances to do what you want are lower. And I would say that I'm an example that they are not. I'm from a very small city in the mountains. I grew up during communism. I'm from middle-class family, but you can even say that I grew up on the streets because I really was part of the community of people that did drugs and sold them, and some of them ended up in prisons. So yes, I can say I grew up on the streets, I think. And despite all that, I finished school and started doing what I preferred to do and managed to be, you can say, successful, I guess. So it really depends on you, and I would say that nothing is impossible even if you have a bad starting position. Speaking of which, I was born in 1975 during communism, and basically there were no games. I couldn't learn English. This is kind of like accumulation of different mainstream things these days. So basically everything was shit. And there was nothing much to do, and you didn't even say what you think about it because then your parents would go to prison. So despite that, I had quite good childhood, but I didn't have any computers. I get my first computer when I was 14 years old, because the computer was something you just can't buy in a normal shop. You had to get it smuggled from Western Germany, most likely. It was very hard to get any games. You can only pirate. And when I signed myself to a computer class in school, on first lesson they told us that they didn't have any computers, so we will learn about electronical devices. So I never go there again. This was my very favorite book from famous child. I grew up with this book, basically. I grew up with a lot of books because my mother worked in library, but this was one of my favorite. And this is probably the very first experience of game, digital game, and it's a Nintendo ripoff from Russia. So I didn't own it. I had different one with a turtle that kind of throws out coconuts or something, and I broke it very, very quickly. But this was my only experience with games until I was 10 or something. Then we had this phenomenon of arcade machines that were going around the state in buses, basically, where you can spend all your money. So this is the place where I firstly saw actual games and play them. It was very expensive. I would say that one game costed in today's money probably something like $10 or something. It was very, very expensive. But despite that, we spent all our money there. The games were very old usually, so in 1988 I was playing Golden Axe, which was already 6 years old or something. Galaxians were still cool, despite that they were like 15 years old or something. So it was very, very behind. It was not the latest shit. It was very old. But we really like it, and there's a guy in front of me who collects these old arcade machines. My friend, he has like 200 of them in a museum, biggest museum in Europe, basically. So I go there from time to time. This is one of my favorite games, Tecmonite. It was something like Golden Axe, but you can change shapes, and it was very cool. I remember it today. And my first, there was practically zero possibilities to learn about games or programming in most of the magazines or TV. TV was absolutely out of mind. So basically there were some mentions somewhere. So this is, for example, from some magazine, when they printed basic code for Minefield, and you can program it into your computer and then play it and then delete it and program it again if you didn't have cassette tape, which I guess some people even didn't have at the time. My first connection with personal computers were through these. The pink one is actually one we had. So basically people were smuggling Western Germany shopping catalogs into our country, which is ridiculously sad. And we were looking at stuff that we couldn't buy in our country, like this. And for 13-year-old boys, it was really interesting, these things. But there were other things as well, like this. So my first influence, or my first insight in personal computers and games for personal computers were these little tiny pictures where I could saw how games for personal computers look like. And when I saw it, I wanted to make games. And I never saw an actual home computer, but I wanted to make computer games. Years later, after that, I actually purchased my first computer. That's me when I was like, I don't know, 14 years old. And with a clone of Spectrum, Czech clone of ZX Spectrum called Didactic Gamma. And this is it. I still have it. And basically, it's 80 kilobytes, so supercharged version of ZX Spectrum. And I also got it in 1988, I guess, so it was already 5 years behind its best era. But despite this fact, we bought or pirated a lot of games, which was done in a way that somebody send you such list, you just marked the games you want, and in a week you received tapes with shitloads of games for like $1. So that's what we did until late 90s, I would say. And basically we pirated everything. We have to do some stuff for ourselves. This is Campstone interface for the ZX Spectrum, because they didn't have joystick port. You have to kind of bustle your own interface for joystick to be able to play with the joystick. And the biggest influence on me was by this book. It's a book by František Fuka, Computer Games, and it was kind of I copied the book. Actually, I cycle-styled, I don't know if it's even word in English, on a very bizarre machine. This book in very shitty quality. Then I don't know how to say it in English. I made the book myself from those papers. I drew the cover for the book, and that was my Bible. And basically, it's all important games on ZX Spectrum that were ever created. So basically, I learned a lot of stuff about what made those games so complicated and stuff on Spectrum, and then I copied all those games and played them. Which gives me to the first nothing is impossible things. On Spectrum, you copied games by Spectrum. So basically, Spectrum had 48 kilobytes of RAM, and so you have to load the copying program and then the game into the program, and then record the game back to the new tape. But if the game had 48 kilobytes, how can you squeeze in the copy program? So the guys, what they did, there was 4 kilobytes of video RAM, to which they uploaded or placed the code for the copying program. And basically the code for the program is hidden in those pink letters. It's stored in the letters, in these ASCII symbols or whatever. And the game are these little colorful squares. That's the code for the game. They changed as you loaded the game. So that was first kind of like really cool things they did back in the day, that you could do something that was at first sight impossible, and you can do it and achieve it. And it was really, really interesting. Another pretty cool thing was like, so let's say I told you to make a game in open world with a lot of independent characters, with RPG stats, lots of illustrations, where you will be able to speak to those characters in really natural language to tell them complicated instructions what to do, for example. But it was year 1982, and you had 48 kilobytes of RAM. This game is The Hobbit. It's the game where I learned English because it's a text adventure with pictures. And that's the game because of which I learned English, because I wanted to play it. So basically I played it with the vocabulary in my hands, trying to translate what's written there. And it was some funny situation because, for example, there was a sentence like, you can go to several places. And sever means north in Czech. So I thought, oh, several, that means north. And it didn't. But I learned English thanks to this game. They used like really brutal compression methods to squeeze it into the memory. The game was mostly programmed by a woman that actually sold like 1 million copies at the time. And the lady never knew that the game sold 1 million copies because she left a couple of months before it was completed and released. And she was not interested in games and programming anymore. So like 15 years later, she found that she's famous. And she kind of missed a lot of money. What? She was a student at the time, and she and her partner, they did quite an amazing stuff at the time for a game. Basically, the whole code for the game was in 17 kilobytes, and then they managed to squeeze in the rest of the memory. They managed to squeeze such kind of a vector images that were actually drawing, when you entered the location, they were drawing like if somebody were painting them. And also a special language parser that had vocabulary of 500 words, and you can give characters on the screen quite complicated commands like, for example, here, say to Torin, or kill the Hydiostrol with the map. You can use adverbs in the commands, and you can give them quite complicated instructions what to do. So it was, even today, most of the text adventures are less complicated or sophisticated than this. It's also very infamous for its bugs, because the game was really non-linear. You can go wherever you want. The characters in the game were running around without your influence, and they were stealing stuff, dropping it somewhere else. So basically, in the walkthrough, you can see that, oh, there is a dagger in screen 13, but it wasn't there because some dwarf picked it up and bring it to screen 18. Or some character could kill another character that was necessary to finish the game, and you couldn't finish the game, and the creators didn't consider this to be a bug. So the game was really, really, very complicated. Every character has some RPG stats, and everything was basically kind of like emergent gameplay things, which was quite fucking amazing for 1982. It's unbelievable. Most of the games don't do it today because it's too complicated, and I can tell you it is, because we are doing it too, and we have also a lot of bugs. And so it was one of the first games in the age without internet that was released in version 1.1, which fixed a lot of things but broke the game so it couldn't be completed. And so they released version 1.2, which made the game playable again. I guess that you have to buy each version again, so it was much harder than patches today. But it's because the game was so hard to bug test, and especially on the machines that has 48 kilobytes and basically no development tools. This was really, really super big milestone in game development for me, and very important game for me. Another game, very important game for me, is by Peter Cook. The guy was an English teacher, mathematics teacher, and he basically bought the first Sinclair computer when it was released, and learned programming because he was teaching kids in school to computers, and he learned programming because of that. And then he started releasing games, and this is fucking amazing game. It's called The Academy. And it's a simulator of something called Skimmer, basically a spaceship that's drifting across the landscape of some moon. And basically, in 48 kilobytes, you can build the ship, you can assemble the different parts, place the windows wherever you want. It was one of the first games that used mouse cursor as well. If any, like a lot of you probably know ZX Spectrum, so it has those borders that cannot be used for drawing graphics, and you can only see loading lines there. So the guy managed to show graphics in those borders, so there was some text displayed in the border. And in the rest of the memory, he had pretty good 3D simulator that had shaded polygon graphics. And it was quite fast, and it was absolutely amazing. It was something like Elite, but on the surface. So you can go around some cities, and like the first sequel was more like Elite. This is the sequel that was more action-oriented with some missions. Again, absolutely unbelievable achievement for ZX Spectrum. Something that is impossible to do, and this guy managed to do it. Which brings me, his story brings me to the history. So this is the computer, the first computer he bought. It's Sinclair ZX80. It had amazing 1 kilobyte of RAM. And that's the thing that basically is the reason why we all here. Because it started the computer revolution in Europe, basically, especially in Britain. Because it costed £69, which was 4 or 5 times less than other computers at the time, so everyone can buy it. And everyone in UK did. And because there were no computer games that you can buy, magazines printed, as I showed you, basically the code, basic code. You have to write the code into the computer, which can take you hours, and then you can press enter and play it. Or there was a bug and you have to debug it, and thanks to this, thousands of people, maybe tens of thousands of people in UK learned to code. And even in our country, it worked very similarly during the communism. So lots of people learned to code thanks to this computer, and also thanks to this lady. Because because in the 80s, she started kind of to change the British education system. Most of the people that were involved think for the worst, but she was a huge supporter of this kind of new programs, and she supported one of the most important British computer classes that were basically aired by BBC, and each school received these computers called by BBC Micro. It's actually an Accord computer. So basically each school in Britain has computers, and kids learned how to code on them. And because games were not available in shops, so kids were super interested in programming because they can create their games. So thanks to that, Britain really saw a huge boom of game development, and for a couple of years they were the biggest game producer in Europe. And they couldn't be compared to Germany or any other state in Europe, I would say. And that inspired a lot of people, including us in Czech Republic. So that's the reason why I started to make games as well. So this is one of the first designs. So that's how we did it actually at the time. So we actually used paper to make art. On the left there is a design for some text game that I planned to do. So there's a map and some text that was supposed to display there. In the school under the desk I was drawing these. That's probably maybe for some Demoscene stuff, maybe later. So we are doing a lot of the stuff. I really liked Laser Squad, for example. So this is my design for a Laser Squad clone, basically, that I did when I was behind school or something. So I still didn't have computer at the time. So that's what I told you. I was also doing a lot of comic books comic illustrations at the time. This is really, I was 13, 14 years old. And then I finally got my Spectrum. So this is the program I used. It's Art Studio. It was really, we were drawing with joysticks. And this is not done by me, but anyone who remembers the time is Samantha Fox. And I actually did something like that as well. I don't have the tape. I have the tape probably, but I never tried to load it. And that's how I got involved in Demoscene. So This is the picture from my first demo, which was on ZX Spectrum. It was shit, but there's a connection with The Hobbit because it was inspired by Lord of the Rings, and it was trying to replicate the visuals of Eye of the Beholder on Amiga on ZX Spectrum, it looked like this. It did nothing else, basically, so there was a scroller, some music, some cheesy color effects on the scroller, and pictures that I made. Somebody did it better, actually, 15 years or 20 years later, and it's actually playable, Eye of the Beholder on ZX Spectrum. It's done by a Czech guy, actually. This is the original, by the way, and this is the Spectrum version 30 years later or something like that. And it really is playable, the first level at least. So he did better work than I did. Maybe the visuals are a little bit shittier, but whatever. And then I bought Amiga. That's me in my super high-tech room. So Amiga 500, super high-end Russian TV called Merkur, I guess. And shitloads of discs with pirated games. And that was the time when I was introduced to demos. So basically the first proper Amiga 500 demo was shown by me by the guy who was on the left. He had Amiga first before me. And basically, demos at the time were used to show how powerful your computer is. So I was like, ooh, you have a 4-channel sampled music. Ah, and I want this too. So I bought Amiga as well. I spent all my money that my parents gave to my bank account. So I spent everything, which was like, you can buy a car for that. I bought Amiga for that money. And started doing stuff. So this is Red Sector Mega Demo, which was really shitty at the time, but it was one of the first, so it was great. Basically, it was just like, you can switch some audio tracks that were quite bad compared to today, but we were blown away by that. This is, who knows that? It's one of the most famous Amiga demos, Desert Dream, which has still absolutely awesome music. And of course, there was this, still one of the best demos ever created, State of the Art and Nine Fingers by Spaceballs, which was really something like, you can't do this on Amiga. It was, again, nothing is impossible because this was impossible. So they did something that we were sitting in front of the screen, so like, how is it fucking possible? The first version actually destroyed the disk mechanics or the diskettes, but still it was like, what the fuck is happening here? It's really, it has basically on one 880 kilobytes disk, it stored 5-minute long video, basically, with absolutely great music and this kind of polygon / photographed motion captured visuals that were absolutely amazing. And they are still amazing. It's really good to look at even today. And then Amiga died and I started to work on PC. This is, I think, Second Reality by Future Crew, which was also something amazing. And then we also had, this guy was important. A lot of demos had his pictures, Boris Vallejo, his cheesy, sexy paintings that every nerd had on his walls and every pixel artist tried to replicate on every demo. Which brings me again to the Amiga days. This is a X copy for Amiga that was again used to copy discs, and again it did some weird tricks, so you can load this program with this kind of fancy graphics and still be able to use all the memory to copy the disk. I started to study at the school, which may be interesting. I firstly started to study to be a mechanic. Then I was like, oh, that maybe it's not for me. So I was working at the post office for almost a year, and then I started to study at the art school. But I was engraver, which means I could do banknotes, and this is my engraving into copper of Satan, and this is the tools that I used, and I made most of them. So we made the tools first, then we did those, and we used also some heavy machinery to do this. So I'm actually I could work with my hands if I needed. It was also kind of wild days, so there was this kind of like electronic music revolution, and we were doing counterfeit telephone cards and such things. And of course, I bought Gravis Ultrasound, the best sound card ever. It was used by everyone in the demo scene, so we spent like my father's 2 salaries to bought that. And it couldn't be used to play any game because it wasn't compatible with the Sound Blaster. But we did a lot of tracker music with my brother, so we really made, I don't know, tens of songs. One of them is actually used in one of our demos, but I never considered myself to be a musician. But despite the fact that I like metal, I created a lot of techno music in the old days. And it was great. Our band was called LSC, and I did this cover for our demo. We also did a diskmags. I don't know if anyone younger than 30 still knows what diskmags are, but basically that's websites sent by mail on discs to people. So we, under the name Masters, we did a diskmag called Codex, which was about basically reviews for games. So one of my friends programmed it on a PC. I made the art for it on Amiga, and because there were no gaming magazines in our country, we get a lot of the news from German magazines, with the only problem that we didn't know how German. So a lot of the news were kind of a fake news because it was just by the screenshots, but still we shipped, I don't know, 30 copies of it to other people. And of course, on Amiga, I was using Deluxe Paint 4, which was amazing program, much better than Photoshop. I especially liked this multicolor, I don't know, was it a hammer mode or something? You were painting, and you can have 4,000 colors or something, but as you painted, the color that you chose was changing the surrounding colors. So it was basically something, you doing something and you don't know how it ends. And the colors were not like you are using orange and it creates pink around it. It was like using many different colors around your line. So it was kind of like adventure to paint in it. It was time limitation of Amiga, high-res or high-color modes, I guess. I remember it very vaguely. But basically then we started working on first games. So there was this boom of gaming studios. Everybody in the country started to make games. Basically, you open a newspaper, there was an advertisement, somebody gave inserat in, I don't know how it's in English. And we are looking for talented programmers and artists to make games. You can make 1 million crowns. So you enlisted, you go there, and the point was that you were at the school, you were 16 years old, and the guy was showing you like, oh, this is Elder Scrolls Arena. We are going to do something like that. We actually did. And so you have 4 months to do it. I will pay you $1,000 when you finish, and let's go. So we started to do something like Elder Scrolls Arena with 16 years old programmer. This is from a adventure game that we were working on as well, which ended up because we didn't have any animator. So I worked on this with Roman Hladík, who is right now director in 2K Games Czech, whom I started to work on Mafia actually, and who basically drafted me to the company. So we were working together on some old school 16-bit games before that. None of them were ever released. I also worked on some Dungeon Master clone that actually had some demo. I did the graphics for it, but also never released. And I saw the guys who were programming it just once. But I did art for like 2 or 3 different floors. So a lot of work on my side. So something about the mentality of creative person, I would say. In my case, it's that I think that everybody else is doing this stuff wrong. I look at something and I think I can do it better. That's the reason why I do things, because oh, this is wrong, I would do it better. And then I do it, and sometimes it's better. Everybody hates this about me, because I criticize everything all the time. But I really mean it. And the difference between a normal asshole and me is that I'm able to do the stuff that I'm saying sometimes, that I'm criticizing. So basically I criticized games, and all my friends who played games were like, oh, come on, you are blah. And then when we released Mafia, one of my friends was like, oh, I have to say that I always thought that you are an idiot, but you really managed to do it. So, okay, good. But basically, I would say that if you want to do something, that's very important that you look at stuff and you think about how to make it better. That's my creative force, basically. I look at something, I can do it better. There's much things can be improved. Let's try it. That's my mentality, and I think it's very important. This is our first game, Mafia, and again, it was very, very naive. So we joined Illusion Softworks, they made Hidden Dangers, and basically I was like, okay, let's make a game that's gonna be in a huge city, we'll be driving around in cars, there'll be huge shootouts, and it's gonna have amazing story. And Peter Wochoska, who was the CEO of the company at the time and owner, was like, okay, we will just take Hidden Dangers, we already have cars there, we already have shootouts there, we will just make it a city. 5 years later, and several desperate attempts to do it, we actually managed to do the game. And basically, first version of the city looked absolutely stunning. Oh well, a little bit worse than the last version. But the only problem was that we had 4 megabytes of video RAM available on the best graphic cards at the time, and we had 16 megabytes of textures loaded into this video RAM at any given moment. So we kind of realized that's not gonna work, and there was a lot of caching with the hard drive, and we had like 3 frames per second. So we decided that we have to do it differently. And that's when the guy on the left, who was lead artist on Mafia, and also he's a guy from Amiga scene. He did some 2D jumping games when he joined us, before he joined us. And he's quite hardcore, and basically he's the guy that does the impossible. So we were thinking about, okay, we have this city that has like 20 megabytes of video textures, and we need to squeeze it into 4 megabytes and make it look even better than it is right now. And this guy did it. And he did it because he knows all the dirty tricks from the Amiga and Demoscene, and because we had this kind of mindset how to cheat to achieve what we want to. So basically, this is very good example. Cars in Mafia. So we told some guys. I can't do 3D art. I did some textures, and we told some artists that were working at the studio. We told them to do a car, and we told them, okay, you have like, I don't know, 500 polygons, and you can use 1 texture for that. And after, I don't know, 2 weeks, the guys came up with a car that has 1,000 polygons and 2 1024 pixels textures. So it was like 8 times bigger texture that we would like to, and 2 times as much of polygons as we can achieve, we can allow. And basically we were like, oh, are you fucking kidding me? And like, you can do it better. And the guy, his name is Pavel Čížek, or we called him Emmet because he had hair like Emmet from Back to the Future back in the time. He sit down and in 2 days created a car that looked better than the car those guys did, with 512 texture. And the car overall has better pixel resolution on any given surface than the car that used 2 bigger textures. So, because he used the texture much more efficiently, and that's how the whole game was done. So, for example, the first version of the city, we had such buildings. We were doing everything by hand, so we were drawing the textures by hand. They were not photographed, because we didn't have digital cameras back then. So I had this idea, so fuck, it looks ugly. Like, it looks like it doesn't look realistic, so let's photograph the textures. And everybody was like, no, it's... And of course the 2D artists were afraid that they will lose their jobs. So I took my analog film camera, went to the city, took pictures of windows, and scanned them from the... Well, sent them to the lab. When they returned back, I scanned them, and then I started making textures from them. And they look better, of course they look better than the textures we did. And Emmet was like, yeah, great, let's do it this way. Everybody else was against it, but we convinced the others to do it. And of course that we realized, okay, so the other artists, what they did, they used the same size of textures on the whole building. Of course, like that's pointless because you only look closely to the bottom, so then we started using very shitty small textures on the top and nobody ever noticed. And we were optimizing the stuff to that until we really achieved better looking city with 4 times less memory usage as before. Also, one more thing. When we started building the city, I was a designer, so I drew some layout of the city and told them like, oh, this is some skyscraper area and this is the factory area, blah, blah, blah. I have pretty concrete ideas about how the city should look, and I gave it to the artist, and and we had only, I don't know, 30 types of buildings, because we had this limited memory, so we had like only 30 types of buildings. And I gave it to a guy, and after a week, he used all the buildings we had on one street. So, first problem, memory, because he used all the textures we had on one street, they were all in the video RAM at the same time. Second problem, every fucking street looked the same because every street used all the buildings we had, which was absolutely horrible. So you get lost in 1 minute because everything looked the same. So again, we started using the same building in the whole area, but we were rotating it, putting some parts under the ground, using some other models to change it and stuff. Nowadays, it looks pretty Captain Obvious type of advice. At those days, we were like 20 years old. Most of us never ever worked on a game, and there was no other open world games on the market at the time. So there was no advice we can get, no YouTube videos we can watch how to do it. So we basically had to do everything ourselves, and we were really stupid at the time. Nobody told us, like, I never learned it anywhere. I never saw any guide how to do it. So everything was like reinventing the wheel for everything, basically. But in the end, it took us only 4 years. Kingdom Come was much more slower. And at this time, I joined the Bronx. We met at the film festival together with the guys, and we started to do some pretty obsolete already VGA demos. But they were pretty cool. This is actually our Demobit 2000 release. It's called Secret Ultra Dry. It's about perspiration. And some VGA ray tracing as well. We were third, I think, in the demo compo. We lost to the Seven Gods, which is a Slovak group. And I actually hired the programmer from Seven Gods to work on at Illusionsoftworks. So he worked there for like 2 years on Hidden Ninjas 2, I guess, on AI. And I have to say that was like basically my first big demo party, and I was like, oh, these guys, because they were sitting there and they had a manager. There was seven programmers or something, and they had a manager who was running around them and bossing them. I was like, oh, it's not just fun, it's work. And they won, so it worked for them. So I hired a guy, he was working on AI for Hidden Ninjas 2. And then my car broke when I was going home, so our lead programmer had to táhnout mě. Take me along on the highway with his small shitty car, with my big luxurious car, Peugeot. And this is another Bronx production. This is also how to make impossible possible. So this is our 4 kilobytes compo entry at Fiasco, I think. So this picture was rendered in 4 kilobytes. And it was done in a way that there was a routine that when it was zipped, it had 40. When you unpacked it, it has 4. The trick was in that the data for the picture was stored in the name directory file names, which theoretically don't have any bytes on the disk, and actually they do. So Demand came up with this idea. I drew the picture, and we were disqualified. And then again, another big demo. I think this is advanced ray tracing or real-time ray tracing or something. 2. So I made music for that. It was kind of like death metal techno or industrial, and you can say that we were radical at the time. I'm still radical. Every time is good time for some radical action. So yeah, I don't know which position we had. At the time of 7.2p, we were still doing VGA. We are rebels. But from what I just said, you can see that I would say the Demoscene mentality is really helpful in game development. Games, if you want to achieve something extraordinary in games, you really have to cheat. The hardware is always not good enough for your ideal, so you have to cheat somehow. And when you have this experience from the 8 bits or 16 bits computers, it's really, really good, this kind of mentality of how to cheat, how to do some crazy shit to make impossible possible. For example, probably many of you would know Ghost Recon Wildlands. That's really, in my opinion, it's one of the best looking games ever created. Even today, it's like 2 years old or something. And I really was like, when I saw it, I was blown away. It's fucking amazing. It has like 100 square kilometers of absolutely photorealistic landscape. I was like, oh fuck, we can never do this. And I wrote to the lead artist like, oh man, you really did a great job, but I have a company, but I have only 15 artists. And he was like, oh, I have 12. I was like, oh. No, you are fucking lying. You are working at Ubisoft. You have like 2,000 artists. No. Most of the stuff we did is procedural. So basically, they had 200 programmers that did fucking awesome procedural engine. And basically, then they just say like, okay, make us the city in the mountains blue. And the computer did it. And it's like fucking awesome achievement. I really, it's amazing. Even I'm joking, but it was done like that. So they had these amazing tools to do the insane amount of art quickly, but the code was very slow, I guess. Another thing is connected to the stuff that you see that everybody's doing everything wrong, that you have big ego is not bad when you want to achieve something. If you are self-doubting everything you do, and you have to do it somehow. I am really thinking about stuff very deeply before I start doing stuff, so I'm not that much impulsive, but it's really good to have this ego and to think that you can fucking do it better than someone else. Most of you will fail, some of you will not, but those of you who will not fail will have big egos, I guess. So it's very important to have it, even then it can be very annoying and a lot of people will hate you, like me. And of course, then you will learn some pretty bad lessons, as I did, because when you have big ego and things are going according to your plan, you are kind of like, oh, I'm great, I'm doing everything right, I know everything. And then this happens. This is the game I worked on for 2 years. It looked fucking amazing. It was something like Mirror's Edge, but 3 years before Mirror's Edge. It was an Asian heroine with cloaking, super high-end equipment, doing le parkour before Assassin's Creed, and Prince of Persia may have been around already. So I saw le parkour on some fucking French videos on YouTube probably then. And I was like, oh, this is great. Nobody ever heard about it. It has like 100 views on YouTube. It was just starting. I was like, oh, let's make games like that. And we started doing it. It looked amazing. We drove around all the publishers. I had 100% belief in the thing. So I had this mentality, okay, so it's great, so it had to go right. Somehow it will happen. We had lots of problems. Every publisher was like, oh, is it good? Maybe. And then it failed, and it was cancelled, and 2 years of our work was gone. And I was like, oh shit, I'm not that lucky always as I was before. So it was a pretty tough learned lesson, and it happened to me twice in a row. So before that, we were making another prototype, which was also awesome. It was basically Assassin's Creed in Prague. And it was also cancelled because publishers told us that we are not able to animate it as good as some other companies are doing. So, and everybody wanted me to do another Mafia. So basically it was the problem. Everybody at the time was like, oh, you made Mafia, let's make something together. So EA was wanting to do Godfather, and they probably wanted us to do it. I was there, but I showed them this. Oh no, fuck off. And so basically it was like 3 or 4 years of my life wasted on games that were never released. It was really, really painful process because you really was believing in it. It was pretty well developed, and then it just doesn't exist. But when you don't risk anything, you don't gain anything, basically. I would say that risk is highly overestimated. This last week I read some advice from some crazy Silicon Valley billionaire, and I hate those advices how to be successful, but the guy was right. He said, you have to be an egoist to achieve something, and risk is overestimated. You have to be willing to do risks. And basically that's what we did. So I quit my job. I was, let's say, successful, rich. Nobody wanted to fire me at the time. And I was like, oh, fuck it, I'm going to start my own company. And then I was unemployed for 2 years. I spent all the money, and I really was on the edge of bankruptcy. And nobody wanted to give me the money because it was 2009 and it was crisis. So everybody was like, oh, you should have come 2 years ago. Now we are trying to survive, not give money to anyone. So that was a big problem, and I really planned to return to my mother and live in her basement because I had like 5,000 crowns on my bank account, and then we signed the deal. We were lucky. It was pure luck, basically. And then we made this game with awesome, super realistic next-gen graphics, and we even ported it to consoles with the different specs. And it was quite a risky project. As we said at the beginning, it took us 7 years since we started the company. We went almost bankrupt several times, which was also quite like, my blood pressure was 170 by 110 4 months after we shipped it, still. And I really was thinking like, fuck, what I did wrong. And then after I became much more relaxed, it went back to normal. And sometimes it returns, so I hope. My doctor said that I'm a hypochondriac, but I don't know. We even did some Demoscene versions of Kingdom Come as a side effect of some bug. This is like you go to work. You go to work one day, you run the build, and this happens. And you didn't do any drugs before that. So basically, even on Kingdom Come, we try to do the impossible. So for example, we are using CryEngine, and there was a guy in Crytek who was doing this fancy new way of global illumination. And I was like, oh, it's cool. And even the guys at Crytek were like, yeah, it's cool, but it's done for architects before it's fucking slow. So we don't recommend you use it. And I was like, oh, fuck that, let's use it. And we used it, and it was slow, and then we tweaked it together with the guy who was doing it, and the guy was super happy that his fancy code is going to have some better usage than for architects. So he was really helping us out, and we managed to kind of use it, and all of a sudden the art was looking 100% better because shadows in these days are one of the ways how to improve the art, because like the models are already really, really good. So the lighting is the most important thing right now. So we managed to have better lighting than anyone else. But when the option was in front of us, it was the risk taking that we tried to do something that everybody else told us like not to do it because it's too complicated and it's going to be slow and you will just burn some time and then you will realize that it's not possible. And we tried it and made it possible, and the game looks better. And we did many such things during the development, and we ended up like The Hobbit, because every time we fixed something, it caused us lots of issues. The game is almost impossible to test because it's too complicated and too emergent. And every time we fix something, we break something else, just like Hobbit 1.1. And there is no way basically how to avoid it. We are doing our best how to kind of avoid this, but everything we try, we always end up with another problems. So when the complexity of the project reaches some level, it's really kind of like impossible to do everything. And I don't know, many people think that it's just like another RPG, nothing different than Skyrim, but really underneath the surface we have lots of systems and things that no one ever did before, which make the game special for people who played it longer than 15 minutes. But on the other hand, make it much more complicated for us and much more prone to bugs. But on the other hand, I really do think that it was worth the risk. It has its negative points, but in the end, the game is much more interesting than it would be if we take the safe bet, I would say. And so even the bugs are worth it. So basically, that's it. Generally, when I was thinking about the Demoscene, I think that Demoscene is really a kind of a punk of IT or nerd punk or something. So those normal programmers who work in the banks or some accountant software or at Microsoft, they don't do anything crazy and they look weird. At the demo parties, people drink and take drugs, and they are able to code some quite amazing things. I wasn't looking at demos for last year, I would say. From time to time, I look at new demos. Before I was going here, I was like, oh, I should look at something. And I was thinking that I will give everyone some advice how to do it, because I felt that the demos are definitely going to be worse than they were when I was young. When I look at some demos, I was like, oh, they are not. They are quite... people are still doing some interesting stuff. For me, the Demoscene was the Demoscene was always about pushing the boundaries of possible, making impossible possible. As I said, when we were young, when we have the Amiga, we showed the power of Amiga to PC guys, bastards. Amiga is better. Look, Spaceballs. You don't have it on PC on your shitty EGA monitor. So we were really, and that was it. Like you can do in Demoscene something that wasn't possible in games, because games have some other stuff to do as well, and they have to be quite reasonable. So for me it was doing this, and I'm glad that there are still people who are doing it. I saw some demos that were like really like, oh, how do they do it? That's for me Demoscene. You do something that's impossible to do, and you make it. And it's not just like tech demo, it's also cool, with good music. So, kind of a punk of technology. So that's about it, thank you very much, and have a nice day.
Are there some questions?
You take job offers.
Hey, hi, I'm Michael. Thank you very much for your presentation and for the games. I'm a gamer.
Thank you.
Love all of them. So, what's next? I mean, you're gonna work on DLCs for Kingdom Come, or you're gonna return to some older projects?
That's of course secret. So I'm gonna be droning in money and like buying all the coke and stuff. Yeah, but we do something, but it's very secret. I can't speak about it. But we really like the DLCs. Like some people were criticizing us that the DLCs are too small or something. But I would say that really we spent most of our effort last year. We spent on the DLCs, and because like even if some of them are maybe not like 20 hours long, they usually use some technology that we added to it or we did some improvements in it. So even if the gameplay is like, I don't know, 6-8 hours maybe, it's still a lot of effort. With the last DLC we are planning to release, there's a couple of stuff that is really complicated for us to do. So it took us a lot of effort, and most of our programmers and scripters were really working on DLC. So even if we are doing something, it's still kind of like side project for this KCD1. No other question? Okay? Or?
Did you buy reťazku a hodinky?
But just only 1,000 euros. I have to buy more expensive ones. A reťazku stále nemám.
Anyone else?
Hello, I just want to ask what was the biggest obstacle in making the game Kingdom Come?
Basically, the biggest obstacle was always the money. In our country, there was also a problem that you have limited amount of money, and also limited amount of people that are able to do what you plan to do. So basically, there is not enough experienced people that will be willing to work for the money you have. So our biggest struggle was always the money. But then we used like lots of things like AI. We are really using some weird, complicated AI things, and it was rewritten several times. The combat system also has like several versions, and it was like we had to scale down the battles. So basically, our biggest issue was the amount of the characters on the screen. So we have this super fancy clothing system, which is so fucking cool that you can dress your character in like thousands of different variants. But everyone in the game uses the same system, and the system highly limits the power that we can use for drawing those characters. So our original plan was to have like 100 characters on screen, and then we're like, oh, 20. Here comes the battles. So, and again, we were making the impossible possible. So then we were doing shitloads of different tricks to have at least, I don't know, 60 characters on screen. So we were doing like fake characters with no collisions, and limited clothing system, and some animated backgrounds, and we were changing the lighting of the scenes to have more power for drawing the characters. So, and even then, it doesn't look as I would like to, but it was big, really giant effort to make it possible, even as it is right now. And if we didn't have the clothing system, it would be much easier for us. So that's one of the first things that we decided to change it, and we already made the impossible possible, and we are going to use it in one of the DLCs already for some characters. So we made the characters look better with high resolution textures. They use 1/5 of the memory they used before. They really look better. The models are more complex, and you can still have, and because of that, we can have now like 3 times more characters on screen with this system, and they look better. So again, somebody sit down and was thinking about some tricks how to do it. It looked impossible. Everybody was like, no, we can do it. And like in a month or so, they came up, oh, we have this idea, and maybe we could do it this way. And right now we have a much better system, much more efficient, that is also efficient and better looking, which is something that you usually don't get better stuff for free. And we kind of managed to do it.
I'm sorry, but we should continue our program. Other questions maybe in the lobby personally. So we have to continue.
Okay, thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dan Vávra.